Well, episode 40, I believe.
40 whole episodes of doing this.
Yes, I know. And we took a little bit of a break there. We missed it, basically missed what would have been a normal episode slot. So it should have been episode 40 2 weeks ago.
Exactly. But we were
Yeah,
busy, so what can we do?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's
Mm.
right. So we've got a few things to talk about today or tonight.
Yep.
Surgical castration in Louisiana.
Hmm.
So this is quite interesting, I think. There've been quite a lot of places that have done chemical castration. Now, let's be very clear here, this only applies to men.
Yes.
So, yes, there are techniques to chemically and surgically castrate men. I don't even think there are techniques to even chemically castrate women. At least nothing that's sort of really well established. So,
Yeah, the
but
equivalent. Yeah.
yeah, I had a bit of a look around and so there are various states in the US that will do chemical castration: California, Florida, Iowa, Louisiana, of course, Montana, and Wisconsin. Apparently, also Guam. There are a number of countries, quite a lot of countries that do it, including Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, in the English-speaking world. And famously, Alan Turing was chemically castrated in
Yep.
1955. Yep. So
And not even for being a convicted rapist,
quite
actually.
right.
Right.
Exactly. That's right. So he was in fact chemically castrated for being gay. That's what
Hmm.
it amounts to. Yep.
Basically,
Exactly.
yep.
Yep.
Right.
So they did. I think the British government did actually sort of, I mean, did apologise to him posthumously
Hmm.
a few years ago. But here's the thing, though, and he died a little while after that. And there's a
Hmm.
question about whether he took his own life or whether it was an accident.
Yep.
I don't know. I don't know what you think, Vernon. I've looked into it. I think it was an accident, but a lot of people feel it was suicide. So we'll never
I
know.
know something about it. People like to kind of romanticize it as a suicide, I think. It very well could be an accident, but
That's
but
right.
supposedly he's had some kind of since this chemical castration, he has been having like a lot of psychological kind of turmoil, which is, who's surprised, right? I mean,
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, it's if you would say it was a suicide, it won't be too surprising sounding, is the thing. So I think many kind of go that route.
Yeah, I think you're
But
probably right. We'll never know. It may well have been a suicide. On balance, I feel it was probably an accident. The reason I feel that
hmm
is that he died as a result of cyanide. Now,
hmm
he's known to have used cyanide as he had a bit of a hobby of cleaning old silver and coins and so forth, and that required cyanide. So he had cyanide in the house. Obviously, if he was
right,
intending to take his own life, that would be an obvious route.
yeah,
My suspicion, though, is that a lot of people who take their own life using cyanide leave warning notices because cyanide is so
hmm
dangerous,
yeah.
and no notice was found. So my belief is that if he was intending to take his own life through cyanide, he would probably have left a warning notice so that other people wouldn't be accidentally exposed.
hmm
And since there was no notice, on balance, I tend to think it
hmm
was probably an
Sure,
accident, but we'll never
right.
know.
Sure. Now, for people who might be not so privy about what this chemical castration is, what does it entail?
Yeah, well, my understanding is that it actually affects sort of, I suppose, sex drive. It
Hmm.
reduces the desire for sex, I suppose, in a man, I suppose is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah.
There's really some question about it, how effective it is as a strategy. You could perhaps make the argument that those sort of crimes are not being driven by the sex drive so much anyway. It is, though, as I understand it, reversible. And that's, of course, which is my main concern in relation to surgical castration, that it is
Mhm.
like execution. I don't object to execution because I find the death is an intrinsically objectionable penalty for a sufficiently serious crime. I don't. I object to the death penalty because our system can and does get it wrong. And that's the
Yes,
same reason that I would object to surgical castration over chemical castration, which can at least be reversed, as I understand it.
exactly. Yeah. And it seems like this sort of thing is a direct attack on male libido, I think. I mean, by this I mean, uh, that is what is being targeted in the
Mhm.
procedure, right? And why wouldn't it cause more problems than just, cutting off the sex drive alone, basically?
Mm.
Yeah.
That's right. So if the state really feels that this is necessary, I think chemical castration would be a much better option for the reasons that I mentioned. And so apparently this is going into effect on the 1st of August in Louisiana. Now it is apparently only for sex crimes against minors. That's my understanding. But
Okay.
yeah, as I said, the same prohibition. Yes, but we know the state gets it wrong in those sort of offences, and happens
Yep.
more often than it should. So
Yep.
yeah. So for this reason, yes, I'm against surgical castration rather than chemical castration.
Exactly.
So, moving on, we've got a few different countries mentioned tonight, actually. I was going to mention one from Australia, and then we've got one from
Uh-huh.
Japan, and then the UK, and back to the
Yeah.
US. So it is a
Back to
bit of
the
a
US. Yep.
multinational night, yes.
Hmm.
So the next item I wanted to mention is something called the Koori Court that I'm sure you would probably never have heard of.
Probably not.
No, this came up. This is something that's been around for a while. It's been around since 2002. It actually came up in a news item a few weeks ago, which reminded me to mention it. I'm not going to talk about the news item at all, but in terms of the court itself. So in Australia, there are of course Indigenous Australians who have been here for a very long period of time before European arrival. Exactly how long is still a matter of some question. Around 60 to 65,000 years is probably generally accepted as the most likely answer. There's a bit of debate though about exactly how isolated Australia was during that time.
Yeah.
The mainstream view today from certainly, as I say, Indigenous political groups is that Australia was extremely isolated and that there was little to no contact before Europeans and before some limited Asian contact. I think this is my suspicion is that this is being driven for political reasons because I think they're relating to native title and all this sort of thing. I think there's some pretty strong evidence to suggest that there was contact with Europe with actually people possibly from India and Southeast Asia around about 4,000 years ago. So there's indications that the languages across the Australian continent changed, and new food processing techniques were introduced. New animals and plants were introduced. All sorts of things happened.
Mhm.
Particularly the language change is generally associated with a population movement rather than just contact. But the mainstream view is very much rejecting this. This is not directly related to the Koori Courts, but I wanted to sort of offer some background information there.
Mhm.
So a lot of this is politicized, unfortunately, at the moment. And we have some ancient sites in Australia where there are bones and so forth, and they've fallen under Aboriginal Australian control for I guess religious/territorial reasons.
Mhm.
And they're in the last sort of 10 or 20 years, they've refused to let the bones be tested for age and so forth. So
Mhm.
that's a bit unfortunate too. And really, I think we could really learn some great stuff about the ancestry of Australian Aborigines if we were
Mhm.
able to test those bones. But so I think I've been doing a bit of reading on this lately, and I think that there probably was quite significant contact about 4,000 years ago. Some studies about 10 years ago suggested this was the case. Then more recent studies have called it into question. But again, there's the same politicization in science that we've seen in a lot of other areas as well now. But to me, the clincher is the language change. The fact that I think
Mhm.
something like 88% of the languages, indigenous languages on the continent, were relate to one language group, and that language group they believe entered the continent about 4,000 years ago. So I think there's been a lot of contact there, I suspect, as in and movement of people into Australia. I did want to mention the Macassans. Taking this opportunity to talk a bit about Indigenous Australians that
Sure.
a lot of people probably don't know. The Macassans are pretty interesting. They're a group in Indonesia and not far from Australia, about 400 kilometers or something like that.
Mhm.
They definitely had contact with the Indigenous Australians before the British arrived. So I think that, well, the British arrived in 1770. For those who don't know, Europeans, the first confirmed European contact was the early 17th century, 1604 or something like that. The
Okay.
Macassans were trading with the Aborigines by the 18th century, but possibly much earlier than that. So 14th century Chinese coins have been found in Australia that in the north. That doesn't mean that Chinese were here from the 14th century, and it doesn't mean that anybody was here in the 14th century outside the Aborigines. But nevertheless, it does give an indication of some sort of ancient contact, but more ancient than is generally recognized, I suspect. Could have been on a trade route, maybe it was 16th century, you know, and the 200-year-old coins were still around. Who knows? But I think we can be pretty sure that there was a lot of trade contact there. Anyway, across Australia, there are many language groups and many indigenous groups. I think it's something like 400 languages. I've even heard numbers as high as 800, but I think the latest one they're saying is about 400 different languages. And there are Aborigines will use different terms for themselves across the continent. Not so unsurprising. Sure. North American, Native American tribes did the same thing. Obviously, they had different identified groups, different tribes. Yes. Right. So the Koori are is what Aborigines will call themselves in the Australian state of Victoria, at least part of the state of Australia, Australian state of Victoria. So Koori Court effectively refers to an Aboriginal court that exists in one particular part of Australia. As far as I know, no other part of Australia has done this. But anyway, the court is basically a parallel court system for Indigenous people. Now, they can apparently elect to enter the court system. Started in 2002. It does run in parallel with what we call the magistrates court. So if someone's got Indigenous ancestry, they can elect to be basically, and they're accused of an offence, they can elect to have the matter dealt with in the Koori court rather than in the standard magistrates court.
I see.
Yeah, and the idea is that Indigenous elders are brought in. Now, they've claimed that this actually reduced recidivism rates since after this was introduced in 2002, and if so, that's great. And there's a lot of explanation there. And by the way, it was rural Victoria where these courts exist, as I understand it. Nevertheless, despite all that, the idea of ethnically based courts causes me to have some misgiving.
Yeah. So I'm of the same mind right there.
Yeah. I'm even prepared to believe them on the recidivism rates are lower, and that's great, right? Mm-hmm. Couldn't they bring the community elders in to the regular courts or something like that? Maybe as friends of the court or something like that. Having an entirely separate court based on ethnicity, yeah, very concerning for me. And in addition, the definition of Australian Aborigine is very, very broad. So someone can have quite a small proportion of Indigenous ancestry and still qualify as an Aborigine. Mm-hmm. So, and by the way, they constitute about 2 to 3% of the entire population. So it's a much smaller proportion than you would see of, say, Indigenous communities in other parts of the world, generally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I did cover quite a lot of material there in terms of history of ancestry of Australian Aborigines, and this is some other stuff I'm looking into. I mentioned some of this stuff in the book, but yes, getting back to all that, I am very concerned about this idea of ethnic courts, and I hope it's not. We don't see an expansion of this in the future, honestly.
Well, it's worth noting because it's a form of segregation that's pretty willing on the part that nobody really seems to expect. It's the other side all the time. Like we're always seeing all these people trying to claim racial identity and somehow advocate for DEI at the same time, basically, as long as it's not right. Because it's not about natural organic integration, like forgetting race and just kind of involving ourselves as like a human community or anything like that. It is neither what DEI is or ethnic willing segregation as such is either. And it's a court, so I can't really place it in terms of mere freedom of association either. It's something. It just appears to be something more than that.
Yes, but that's right. Being a function of government, one concern I have is it's optional at the moment. Apparently, the Australian Aboriginal person can elect to go through the Koori Court, or they can go through the regular court. What if that isn't the case in the future? I mean, it's been around 22 years now, but what if it's been around 50 or 100 years? And maybe do we start seeing a situation where people of certain ethnicity are required to go through a particular court system? So, I mean, along these lines, actually, I didn't originally think to mention this, but I think I will. So there's some quite serious problems in the Australian and Aboriginal community. Very high rates of substance abuse, very high rates of sexual abuse of children, very high rates of domestic violence. The domestic and intimate partner violence rates are so high that they affect the national average, even though they're only a small percentage of the population. The sniffing of fuel was such a serious problem in outback areas that the Australian government basically convinced all the oil companies in Australia, the petroleum suppliers, to manufacture a special fuel for use in remote areas that can't get you high.
Okay.
Yep, it's more expensive, and I believe the oil companies actually wear the cost of that. And yeah, and they did that because the fuel sniffing, as it's called, was so bad in indigenous communities. But where I'm getting to with that is there was a case, as I said, child sexual abuse is quite a very serious problem, and there was a case some years ago in the Northern Territory, quite a remote area with a relatively large indigenous population, and an older man was convicted of sexually abusing a child, and he was given a reduced sentence because of his cultural background of an Aborigine. And there was a huge outcry in the community at the time, and I believe he was resentenced. But the very fact that the courts would even consider reducing his sentence because of cultural background, as if this behavior is somehow more acceptable in his culture, it's just, yeah, it disgusted a lot of people. It disgusted me. So, but it is,
Well, it's amazing. It's amazing that in Australia, of all people, there's an uproar, considering the state it is in, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so there was quite an uproar over it, and yeah. So anyway, that was some years ago. I didn't actually look it up before, but I recall. I think I was living overseas at the time, actually. But yeah, anyway, so that's I mean, while we're talking about this topic, a lot of people overseas look at the state of the Aborigines in Australia, and they're quite shocked, and they think the Australian government isn't doing anything for them. The Australian community isn't doing anything for them. In actual fact, for decades, there's been sort of no limit to how much money the government's prepared to pour into this problem. But so far, very little has been effective. There was a program some decades, 20 or 30 years ago, where they linked government employment, what we call the dole, government unemployment benefits, to school attendance of children. And that, I believe, caused school attendance to go up. But then some people thought that was discriminatory and the program was cancelled. So there's a lot of effort's been put into it. Very little has come out of it. Indigenous Australians continue to have a life expectancy significantly shorter than the national average. They're poorer. They have higher crime rates. They have, there's, I believe the incarceration rate isn't, sorry, the incarceration rate is higher, but the deaths in custody rate isn't higher anymore. It was, but it isn't anymore. There were actually a number of reforms of the system which reduced the Aboriginal deaths in custody rate. So it's around about the same as the national average now.
Well, it's almost as if throwing money at a problem, by that we mean to the government, is not exactly the solution here.
Imagine, because the government's been trying this for several decades. It's been very little success. So yes,
right,
yes,
yeah.
So probably that's all I want to say on the Aboriginal courts. But this has been around for 22 years now, but I think it's quite concerning, and I think we'll see more of it, especially with the rise of identity politics in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, for sure.
The next one I have is from Japan, Takemura Kiriko. How was my pronunciation? Terrible?
Takemura Kiriko.
Okay.
Yep. Now, what people may know this person as is someone named Kyary Pamyu Pamyu. Basically like a pop star, basically. Now we're bringing this up now, but this is actually referencing material from late 2019. So this is not exactly the newest of news. But
no, she's just come onto my radar quite recently, and that's I happened to ask you about her, and then it turns out you knew lots about her, so we thought we'd talk about it.
Well, not a lot about her. I did research at the time, but basically, it concerns something that if the sexes are swapped, there'd be massive radar responses, so to speak. Right, but we're talking about, so there has been a lot of Western backlash about her being a pedophile, basically, because of basically two elements. like some public tweets that she made at the time when she was 19 years old, and it's kind of dubious whether in Japan this is considered a full adult legally or not, because I believe the legal age there is actually 20, even though women could be in adult material at 18, I think. I don't know, it's really convoluted over there, but
Mm.
right. But basically, making tweets about a backup dancer in what I believe is a boy band that is an opener for her act. Because I did some very minor research as to how this kind of things work. I think that's what they're called. And basically, kind of treating him the way I see it, it was not full on serious grooming per se, just kind of, but it's still inappropriate to make to a 12-year-old. And even in Japan, they know this is inappropriate. So this is kind of her going in over her head, basically.
Mhm.
Yeah, basically saying things like, I want to kiss you and I want to sleep while holding you, that kind of thing.
Mm.
So this is just kind of treating him like a human teddy bear, basically. It's
Mm.
and it's not excusable anyway. But it's kind of I don't think this is good for the boy either. And there's some photos of her kind of sitting on the like sitting on the boy's lap. I think this is the same boy we're talking about. Like not in any kind of like grinding kind of way. It's
Mm.
just
Mm.
well, in a way that still, if it was switched around, it's kind of like if if a girl was sitting on a guy's lap, it gets really bad. But basically, it's kind of that's just the way I'm seeing it. It's just really just she thinks she's having fun, but she only is able to get away with it in her mind because this is not something that is readily responded to. Uh, 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 because she is a woman and so forth. And
As you say, it's a double standard, isn't it?
there is a double standard,
Mm.
to be sure. Yeah. Now, it's really tricky when it comes to Japan because it's a myth that pedophilia is accepted over there. People love to kind of throw that kind of thing in order to disparage the Japanese and so forth. But um, that being said, there are things that can be misunderstood over there. Like basically, some things they don't mean to for it to be actual pedophilia. Sometimes it is kind of uh, toilet humor most of the time. But because one thing I won't hear the end of basically is stuff like in Dragon Ball. There's kind of uh, sexy scenes and so forth. But it's then it's chalked up to pedophilia or something in the Western world because of because the attitude is different and so forth.
Do you mean sexy scenes with minors?
Well, the way I'm saying it's like it's not meant to be a sexy thing. It's just meant to be kind of like naughty for the sake of humor, basically.
Right.
Right, yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah,
So there's
sure.
a
But then again,
greater tolerance in the culture for that sort of
well,
humor,
if
perhaps.
if it's for humor and if it's animated, basically, they will not do this for actual minors on screen. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think uh illustrations, uh, it's not right to associate it with the real thing, in my opinion.
No, fair enough. Is that to do with Shotacon? Is that
Well, Lolita complex is the way where we're looking at girls, and Shota complex, also known as the Shotaro complex, is
right?
the way around for boys. And
Right.
Shotaro comes from a character from Iron Man number 49, I think it is. I think that's the
Okay. Comes from a
yeah.
specific cartoon, a specific.
Yeah, it's basically one of the earliest robot animations, actually, kind of like giant robots controlled by like a remote control.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the protagonist is a younger boy, so like I don't know what I think that's just what people immediately first associated with when they came up with the term, I think. But
Right. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, I actually wasn't really aware of the perception of Western perception of Japan in that regard.
Well, they like to throw a lot of things. Like there's a lot of tabloid things like you won't believe this Japanese trend of X weird thing. And
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, even though that's not typical at all, it's weird because it happens once like once in like a billion, you get what I mean.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
Yeah.
I must admit, I've watched a few Japanese game shows
hmm
and been very
hmm
amused by them.
hmm Right. And
So.
yeah, to be sure. But I said there was like two aspects to it. One of them were the tweets, and the second was like what appears to be a screenshot of a text, kind of actually her texting him that, come sleep in my bed because you're so cute. I kind of want to hug you and go to sleep and so forth. It's not appropriate. It's absolutely not something that's appropriate to do because this is something you're doing to uh, somebody that you're in a position of relative trust to. You know,
Mm,
if that made sense.
it
And
does.
right, yes, and so the idea is, so. we don't I don't know if this is a real tweet of them, and I don't know who leaked it that would have access to such a thing.
Hmm.
So I think, it's fair to say that this is kind of it needs verification,
Yep.
but yeah, but based on the tweets, it's just like this sort of thing. I wouldn't put it past her, is the thing.
Right.
To have made
But if I understand correctly, it did say go to bed and sleep.
sleep, yes, right.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, there's no sexual innuendo as such
Yeah.
that I was able to kind of perceive, basically. It's
Yeah.
just
No, fair enough.
kind of kind of her kind of crossing the line, basically.
Yes.
In trying to kind of be, going too nuts about this. It's still not good. And one thing I have to mention though, kind of deviating from this thing is that
Mm.
like a lot of the misconceptions about Japanese society comes from the fact that uh, like in places like baths and such, there's kind of a bit of a disconnect between the Western way this is viewed and how things are over there. Like family bathing is a thing, for instance.
Mm.
Like so, it's not out of the ordinary for parents to take baths with their children if they're sufficiently young, and basically once they're older, they're expected to kind of take their own baths and so forth.
Right.
But
Yeah.
a lot of this has to do with the fact that they need help washing and such.
Yeah.
Uh, right. But that's you can't use that excuse in situations like Biden showering with his daughter because that's a whole completely different context, that kind of thing. Right.
No, it's interesting, and I guess it is a different culture, and some things are going to seem strange to someone from Western culture, and the reverse is probably true as well.
Yeah, to be sure. I think most would probably see Western society as being a bit um, stick in the muds, I think. Uh, yeah, like kind of being
Mhm.
too hard line about basically nothing and such. And and the idea is that and do you know what a konnyoku is?
No, I don't.
Right, yeah. But it's basically you obviously know the public baths, and a konnyoku is mixed sex public bathing. Now there's a
Right.
lot
Okay.
of yeah. Now there's a lot of jokes about like getting with someone cute in there, but the reality of the matter is now I haven't been in a konnyoku, it's just stuff I read, is
Mm.
that uh it's mostly a family setting. It's like families come to bathe in the mixed situation in the
So
mixed, right.
are people wearing clothes at this point?
No.
Okay.
In those places in Japan, you're not allowed to have clothes, basically. You're
Oh,
not
right. Okay.
right, yeah. Yeah. But and I've heard other situations in which contrary to the public stereotype that men are counting on the young girls to kind of get into, like the college girls or something to get in the tub. Men tend to be embarrassed when the college girls kind of rush in, basically.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what that's more towards the reality, I think,
Yes.
of the situation. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So.
I can absolutely understand that of older men too. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yes. Mm.
Yeah, sure. And and one thing that I want to kind of bring up is like cartoons like Crayon Shin-chan, which there are elements that, if they were not censored by by the Western world, I'm surprised how it get it would face any kind of tolerance, basically. Yeah.
Hmm.
So there's like a lot of differences. It's just you know, not everything is about grooming and like pedophilic fantasy or anything like that. Most of it isn't. However, back on track here, this is not appropriate stuff. It's basically vast, unusual absent-mindedness on her part that this sort of thing she allowed herself to do. It's not good. It's not
Yeah.
good for the boy ever because this is also part humiliation too. Basically, kind of tweeting about this 12-year-old
Mm.
guy and making tweets about it, like having photos about it. It's
Mhm.
it won't fly if it was the other way around. That's the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
No, that's a very good point. I think that's the key point exactly that there's simply a double standard and it reveals yet another double standard thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the next item I have on my list is J.K. Rowling, or rather on your list, because you'd mentioned you wanted to talk about J.K.
Well, I wanted to talk about this one last time, but we didn't actually get to have an episode. So this is something back in late June, actually. So, so she made this following tweet, and I'll read it word for word. And the link is some Daily Mail article about Wiltshire police force refused to specify rapist biological sex. So you can kind of guess what this is about.
Yes.
So her tweet with this link is under UK law, only men can commit rape, but once again, female rape survivors get to watch as crown servants who are supposed to be on their side prioritize respecting a rapist's hastily and conveniently assumed gender identity over victims' feelings. So the
Quite a lot in that.
yeah, so she straight up says under UK law, only men can commit rape, and then makes a point that is completely trying to, you know, make you forget about this thing. It's like in her mind, it's okay that only men are said to commit rape, basically.
Mm. Of course.
Right.
Yes.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you're probably just saying like this is just about men being protected from consequences because they switch their gender. But no, like if you she doesn't seem to realize if you um get rid of that stipulation, only men can commit rape, and anyone can potentially commit it, any
Mm.
sex, then this will be resolved anyway. But
Mm.
she's pretty she doesn't understand the irony in her situation here, basically.
Yes, well, I
You know
mean,
what I
this
mean?
is something, yes, this is something we've been seeing for a while, of course, that the trans movement has ripped feminism in half with feminism, of
Mhm.
course, now split between, pro and anti-trans people with the what we would call the trans exclusionary radical feminists,
Mhm.
rebranding as women's rights activists. But yeah, this is something that I guess it's almost feminism has been hoisted by its own petard, if I could
Yeah.
metaphor. This is something that feminism had been pushing. These are ideas that feminism had been pushing for decades, and like gender as a social construct and so forth. And then gender is a social construct, and someone can simply change their gender, and suddenly it's a problem for women. But this has been it's been evident that something like this will occur for a long time. and now it's occurring. Many feminists, ready for women's rights activists, I should say, are blaming men for it.
Hmm. Oh yeah, of course. Yeah,
But yes,
yeah, I mean, remember the whole stand with J.K. Rowling thing? You were duped. You're standing for an idiot. Basically, just standing for just another feminist who
mm,
is using biology and the reality to, the reality of the differences between sexes, but only using it, against men, basically.
yes, exactly. That's right.
Hmm. Right.
Yep. And they complain a lot about the attacks on women's spaces, but men's spaces have been under attack for decades. And if
Exactly.
that hadn't happened, I think if men's spaces had been more secure, women's spaces would now be more secure. So that they have really brought about their own problems in many
Hmm.
ways over a period of
Yep.
decades. Yep.
Right. Yeah, that's basically all I had to say on that one. It's just the irony of such a statement, and
Yes.
I'm obviously not the only one who picked up on that. Other
No.
people kind of noticed that
The,
JK made a complete ass of herself. So,
there really is quite a lot in that one tweet. Absolutely.
yep.
Mm. I think I might get a screenshot of that one and put it on Wiki for Men, actually.
Well, I'll send it to you.
Thank you very much. So the final item I have is, of course, the Trump shooting. So this has happened, oh gosh, probably about 18 hours before we are
Hmm.
now recording,
Yeah.
or everybody knows about it now. And there was an attempted, as they've called it, an attempted assassination. Trump was either injured, either the bullet hit his ear or shrapnel hit his ear. Isn't clear exactly what happened, but certainly he is injured, and it came very close. It could, I suspect, it was a bullet because I'm not sure the shrapnel would affect him at that point, but he could easily have been killed. And I'm have always been completely against political violence, and I always
Mhm.
say that, and I always warn people who engage in political violence. I'm even against even very low level violence. We had a politician egged in Australia a few years ago, and we had this politician. I think it was sorry, Nigel Farage had a pie thrown in his face, as we talked about in a previous episode a little while ago. And I always take a position against that. That's political violence, even though it's at the minor end. I always say about political violence that if you can do it, your opponents can do it, and they might just be better at it than you are.
Mhm. Right.
So if somebody normalizes political violence, they risk that coming back at them in spades.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm reminded of the situation of medieval monarchs in Europe. They notoriously always tried to refrain from executing each other. I mean, Mary Queen of Scots was executed by Elizabeth I, but only after she kept her in prison for more than 20 years. And then I think even after there'd been another coup attempt or something. And they generally tried to avoid it. And the main reason they tried to avoid executing other monarchs is because they didn't want to set a precedent.
Hmm.
So they're at least smart enough to realize that going around engaging in a certain behavior encourages other people to engage in that behavior as well.
Hmm.
So,
Yep.
irrespective of one's politics, I think everybody should wholly reject this. And it concerns me that there are many people who are anti-Trump who are cheering this, and I think it's absolutely
Hmm.
awful.
Yeah. Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I think anybody, and I'm saying this in a completely non-partisan manner. Doesn't matter if it, and I'd be saying the same thing if there'd been an assassination attempt against Biden.
Mhm.
If this happens and he starts to normalize this, then yes, this could very much come back at you. So, and affect the entire system. So, no, I have zero tolerance for political violence.
Right.
But in this case, so the FBI, the latest is, as of us recording, the FBI has confirmed that the person is Thomas Matthew Crooks, apparently. There is a video going around where he apparently claims to hate Republicans and hate Trump. And he also says I was the wrong guy or something, but that may have been recorded earlier. So
Hmm.
there are real questions about the Secret Service performance in this, though. So one female, as I mean, we had. Well, first of all, I wanted to say that there were actually people in the crowd who saw him climbing up on the roof, or have claimed they saw him climbing up
Hmm.
on the roof. There
Yep.
are screenshots available online now which show his body after being killed clearly visible on the
Yep.
roof, an
I saw that
indication
too.
that yep, exactly, an indication that people on the ground could see him. So I believe the guy who's claiming that he tried to warn authorities, and they were slow to respond. And I think I think there really has to be some questions asked about the Secret Service. There have been some suggestions that the Secret Service was under-resourced for Trump, and that the US government had refused requests for additional Secret Service officers. Well, hopefully those will be approved now. And there was apparently also, slightly embarrassing, but one female Secret Service officer who apparently had trouble holstering a weapon after the incident. So having served as a police officer myself and having had a weapon and having trained with it, I don't ever recall having trouble holstering my weapon. So yeah, a little surprising to hear that. A little surprising and disappointing. But the whole sort of conduct, and I'm, I granted about the lack of resourcing, but nevertheless, there seems to be some concern about the conduct of the security services there, unfortunately.
Yeah. So some of us think that they were slightly in on it.
Well, I'm not taking a position on that. I tend to follow the belief that I'll ascribe, I'll assume it was incompetence, unless there's
That's fair.
evidence.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of
Incompetence is
incompetence in the
rampant,
world, and
Yeah.
there's plenty of incompetence in the world. So I'm open to evidence that that's the case. But for me at the moment, I'm just putting it down to incompetence. But that's still, incompetence is still not okay. So
Well, incompetence is not okay at all. It's almost complete. It's basically completely liable. Everyone should be treated as liable for the incompetence. It's almost as bad as
exactly.
deliberate sabotage, to be sure.
And
Go ahead.
I was going to say that could fall to the individual officers. It could fall to their training. So as well. So it could be the entire organization that really has something explaining to do.
Yeah, we've got complete incompetence is more rampant now. We're kind of we're leading into Soviet Russia kind of levels of incompetence, basically, because
that's a good point.
sure, because I've heard another symptom of DEI at work, basically, airplanes. I heard this story about an airplane kind of, a door just blowing out, because of mismanagement after diversity hired staff, basically. I don't remember the details of it, but it's just something I keep on hearing.
Yes, I do think it is concerning. I mean, here in Queensland, the state I live in, Australia, the Queensland Police Service that I previously served with actually got caught out a few years ago. They had actually admitted women as recruits into the police service so it admitted them into training when they had not met the standards required. And in the end, there was an inquiry, and they found that approximately 200 men who were otherwise qualified had been declined appointment into the Queensland Police Service. So there's quite a problem there in terms of the number of men who were qualified who were passed over merely because of their gender, because they were trying to achieve gender quotas. And of course the government said that it was all very well intentioned. They were trying to meet these targets, and somewhere along the line they went off track and started bending the rules in order to meet the targets. But I don't believe it was good. It was well intentioned at all. So
yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, that's all I really have to say on Trump. I absolutely reject political violence. It really will, to anyone who would consider going down that road. Just remember, as I've said so many times before, your opponent, if you do it, your opponents can do it, and they might just be better at it than you are.
Absolutely.
So that's all I have, except of course for Zoe McClellan.
Yep.
Did you have any final items you wanted to mention, Vernon?
Well, I kind of want to provide some clarification with something I said before about the Dragon Ball thing. Basically, because just in case somebody kind of misunderstands where I'm coming from with this thing, and Japanese anime in general, basically, a big scene that's actually kind of, I have no idea. It probably did not make it through the Western censors. This couldn't have made it past the Western censors, but basically the character Bulma, who's she's kind of I think at the time it was an early part of the season, so she was still like 14 or so, and basically, she's trying to get a Dragon Ball from the old guy, Master Roshi, as we call him, and basically, she's trying to, do like suggestive favors just
Oh,
to
right.
get it
Just being
right, and
seductive sort of thing.
exactly, yeah, sure.
Right.
And it just backfires because the protagonist Goku kind of innocently stole her underwear from her in her sleep. So she I don't know how she doesn't know she doesn't have underwear
Notice.
on,
That's right.
but that's where it's meant to be like really comedic and so forth. Yeah,
Right.
and
Yes.
right. And she does kind of really, she does a lot of this kind of stuff early in the season too. So now the problem is, of course, uh, people call Master Roshi a big pedophile for, getting a kick out of that or something like that.
Right.
But first off, it's just a cartoon, okay? It's not advocating for this to happen. In fact, the humor probably comes from how vastly inappropriate it is. But the frustration I have is that, I can't talk about Dragon Ball here without a bunch of progressive Westerners making this like the first thing that they talk about. Oh, Master Roshi was such a pedophile. It's like the mindset is completely different. It's
Yeah.
like people can't, see that this is just poking fun at the inappropriateness of this whole thing. And people are just probably still going to be, you're just too easy on this subject, and so so I don't usually talk about this at all because, but because they probably like to come to, what do you say, like cling on to their misunderstandings and their misgivings and so forth. But um, because it's a delicate subject for a good reason, basically. But I think it is too important a subject to associate the real thing with uh something trivial like a cartoon, basically.
Yeah. Yes. I see what you're saying. Yes.
Hmm. Right.
And as you say, the humor is probably coming from from how
Hmm.
inappropriate it is. That reminded when you said that, it reminded me of sorry, actually live action shows that we used to have in the English speaking world, particularly British
Hmm.
shows.
Yep.
There were a series of shows where there was a very racist character. For example, I should be able to remember the name of one of them now. Love Thy Neighbor. Love Thy Neighbor was one such show. One
Okay.
particularly very racist character. That show has been cancelled now because of some of the things that are
Hmm.
said on the show, but in actual fact, the humor is derived from making fun of the ignorant, in
Hmm.
fact, white men in this case. So, yeah,
Hmm.
but yeah, that's in Western culture, of course, that's all cancelled because
Hmm.
you can't even say those things in order to make fun of that character.
Right, yeah. Hmm. Exactly. Now, on the flip side, the more woke it is, the more acceptance, the full-on embrace of what is inappropriate is to
Yes,
have. Like, I think,
yes,
yeah, yeah, like a lot of today's cartoons from woke people are, completely crossing into bad touch territory. It's like, as long as it's queer, it's okay to expose it to children. That's their mindset, I think, and that's no good.
exactly. That's right. I
Yeah, they're not
agree.
even it's not even, making fun of it because it is inappropriate. It's that
Right.
this, we're trying to lift the stipulation that it is inappropriate, and we're going to try to make it more acceptable. That's what the
Yes.
woke are trying to do, and that's
Yes.
completely
Yes.
different from
There's
yeah, yeah, exactly.
I have a very good example of that, actually. I won't say it now.
Hmm.
I'll prepare it and I'll read the exact quote in a
Hmm.
future episode, perhaps next episode. But
Okay.
an Australian academic wrote an article in the 1980s in which, yeah, he said some highly inappropriate things along those lines.
Hmm.
The article still exists, so it's very scans of it available. I have one myself. So, yeah, I think that's something we'll talk about in a future episode.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. Yeah, make no misunderstanding. We're against child sexual predation of any sort, child sexual
Absolutely.
abuse, any sort. Make no mistake. Don't
That's right.
misquote me and about
No.
the subtle differences, in the Western world and the way Japan kind of handles things. It's not what you think.
And I'm sure that crimes like that are prosecuted to the full extent of the
There.
law, and it's just
Hmm.
as we'd expect here. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And one last thing I would like to add on this thing is that too many people are lax about the real thing, but go on full force against cartoons because it's their
Yes.
way of being a hero, basically, tackling something
Yes.
so marginally harmless, basically.
It's another form of virtue signaling, isn't it?
It is, yeah, exactly, yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like real false accusations, it's almost like that. It's basically, it's the subject is too important to have so much energy placed on what is not even real.
Mm. Yeah. That is a very good point. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to finish up with by mentioning Zoe McClellan.
Yep, sounds good. Let's do that.
Zoe McClellan, as of July 2024, a warrant is outstanding for the arrest of Zoe McClellan in relation to charges of kidnapping, child stealing, and child custody deprivation. McClellan was reportedly residing in an apartment in River Ridge, Louisiana in April 2021 and may still be residing in the area. McClellan grew up in the area of Port Orchard in Washington State and may have returned to the area. Some sources believe that McClellan has left the United States and is residing in Canada or Costa Rica. Prior to disappearing, McClellan was known to use the alias Sarah Chandler. Anyone with any information should contact the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. And that's all I have. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Sure. Catch you later.
Bye bye.
Bye.